Okay, let's go ahead and move on. And again, this is one of those places where we're a little disjointed. We'll now look at organizations from a group's perspective, if you will. Let's see here. Okay. So this is a bit more general in one sense, where we'll be looking at a variety of group dynamics, where groups exist within organizations, how groups affect organizations, vice versa. Right. Start a bit with a definition of a group, and I'm quoting Robbins here, who defines group as two or more individuals interacting and interdependent who come together to achieve particular objectives. And you'll notice that that definition certainly touches upon some of the basic characteristics that we talked about when we were talking about systems in terms of interaction, interdependence, collectives, etc. Now, when we're talking about groups and organizations, and they abound all over the place in organizations, and there are a variety of them. We can talk about task groups, as opposed to the friendship groups, or task versus affective. Talk about interest groups. Now, the one that I want to caution you on is the reference groups. Reference groups, I'm including them here because we hear the term frequently, but the members of a reference group may never even know one another. A reference group isn't the same kind of group at all as the things that we're generally talking about in this unit. A reference group would be generally thought of, say for us, for any of us, as those individuals who may not know one another, but we know them all, and we measure our behavior, we measure our values, we measure our worth against what they think of us or what we would imagine they would think of us, where they know who we actually were. I would refer you back to Johari's window in the hope that they don't really know who we really are. When we're talking about task groups, I want to draw the distinction between a traditional task group and a co-acting group. And that's really important. Let's see here. Think of those as just like poles or posts, leaning up against one another, connected at the top, supporting one another. If the function of that collection of posts, and that's our approximation of a group here, if the purpose of that was to stand, then to remove any one of those posts might imperil the ability of the rest to remain upright. Each depends to some extent upon the other. So there's that interdependence. That's pretty different.
Which group is what?
That's a graphic for one group, all right? For a type of group.
It's not traditional versus collective.
Actually, it is.
Okay.
And I'm about to ask you that question.
You already told us.
No. Here you go. I'm in the process of telling you. This is exciting stuff. This is art. All right? Here we've got the same posts, but they're stuck in the ground. None is touching another. Are they interdependent? Probably not. You know, the only way they could be interdependent is if you pushed one down or one fell and it happened to fall in the direction that hit the other one and then cause some kind of consequence there. These are four posts that are doing similar kind of things, and they're even in proximity to one another, but there's no interrelationship There's no interdependence. That also can be an effort at kind of communicating a kind of group. Now, if we're talking about a traditional work group, and let's think of it as a Habitat for Humanity. We're going to build a house, all right? If you're building a house and you're up there on the roof, are you likely to be dependent upon others? Sure. They're handing you nails, they're helping to support you, they're helping to align wood, shingles, or whatever it is. We're talking about a traditional work group because one of the characteristics of a traditional work group is not just proximity, but it's interdependence. It's people having to work with one another and at times having to rely upon the work of another in order to get your own job done successfully. In a co-acting group, there's proximity, but there's not interdependence. There's proximity, but there's independence. You're doing the same kind of things, perhaps, but you're not relying upon the work of any of your colleagues to contribute to the work you're doing yourself. Think of an old-fashioned kind of secretarial pool, where you've got a bunch of typists that are out there, and as they finish whatever it is they're typing, they bring it up, and they put it in the front in the outbox, and then they pick the next thing up in the inbox, and they go back to their IBM Selectric, and they start typing, right? And there's 7 people doing that. And every now and then one gets up and goes up and puts one in the outbox and picks up another one from the inbox and goes back down and starts typing again. Doesn't make any difference how much typist A types. There's more than enough for typist B to type, and typist B isn't going to type any better or any worse, any faster or any slower, regardless of how any other typist in the pool types. Proximity but independence. Co-acting group. The difference for group process, group dynamics in the workplace is profound based upon whether or not you find yourself in a co-acting group or a traditional work group, or you find yourself managing a co-acting group as opposed to a traditional group. Most teams that we're talking about in human services approximate one or the other. They probably approximate one more frequently than they do the other. If we're talking about a team. In human services, a team is probably better thought of as which of these 2 options?
The co-acting.
In your case, the co-acting group?
I think so, because each member of the team has their own workload. That although they can help each other with that load, it is the responsibility of the individual worker to get that particular case managed.
See, that's very interesting because I was actually expecting that you would answer this way, because usually when we use the word team, we're usually thinking, I think, of interdependence. Football team, for example, the center hiking the ball to the quarterback who hands it off, necessarily having the guards and tackles protect that. It could be that the use of a team here is in some sense a misnomer, because if you're talking about the basic fundamental elements of the team being individual or co-acting, frankly, it approximates more a track team than it does a football team. And if you run track like I used to, you know, you go out there, you run your half mile, it doesn't make any difference how the quarter miler does because he's not out there on the track with you at the time. Doesn't make any difference what the javelin thrower is doing because he's off actually about 300 yards away doing his own thing. Track team is, for the most part, a collection of individuals doing their own thing. But a football team, or to some extent a baseball team, is quite different than that. Or if you're into rowing, you know, you're certainly doing that all together.
But by the same
Go ahead.
token, couldn't it be that there's 3 of us, CBS teams. So individually in that single team, maybe it's like she says, but collectively, all together, all 3 of the teams are traditional traditional because we all rely on each other to make sure that you're at work, that you are there to take your share number of cases. You know, otherwise we would just be like really disordered. I mean, we'd really be bad.
Let's see where we go in a little bit when we start talking about the way different groups, or in this way different teams, might relate to one another. So what I'm going to argue at this point in time, based upon what I'm understanding from the two of you, is that I would regard, I'm going to take your word that this is primarily a co-acting group, even though it's referred to as a team. I will go beyond that and say that because you're classifying it as a co-acting group, your opportunity to supervise the group as opposed to individuals is significantly diminished. You don't have much of group nature in a co-acting group. Now, what can happen here is that we actually have many, many times in organizations nested groups. First of all, we've got formal and informal. Oh, look here, it's right there. Talk about transitions, okay? Formal group is something that a supervisor constitutes. It's like when I created that temporary, ephemeral, could give a damn less kind of thing group up here. All right? That was a formally constituted group, but it had virtually nothing of an informal presence. You might have a co-acting group that's formally constituted. It's very, very clear. There's even a team leader, there's a team name, they've got a schedule, all this kind of stuff. But because they're co-acting, the formal, or the group dynamics of that formal entity might still be very, very weak. Now, it is possible that an informal group can develop nested within that. It may include all members of that team. It may only include some members of the team. In reality, it will probably do both because there'll actually be multiple nested groups. There'll be a very general kind of informal group composed of all members of that team that will have very little importance to the members of that team. But there'll be some people who, by virtue of shared work that really relies upon one another for effectiveness, or shared interests, right, personalities, etc., where they enjoy one another, that they create friendship groups there. And that informal group nested inside here, right, is a very different kind of thing than the co-acting group. It might well be a recreational or a social group with a high level of cohesion and a high intensity for those particular members. See? But what's happened as we've gotten to that, to recognize that, is we've had to go through a number of layers from formal to informal, and the whole nature of the team, the whole nature of the group dynamic has changed, its membership has changed, it's become much more exclusive. That's a distinct possibility. The point that I want to make is that if you've got a traditional group here, work group, that it's in the interaction and interdependence that you have a recurring opportunity for a group identity to form. And what typically happens is that the groups that grow out of traditional work groups have a much more thorough, much better developed set of group characteristics. There's much more intensity to the members, to the membership of the group. The groups have more importance to those members. And as a manager, you have more opportunity to directly influence group norms, group leadership, supervise the group, as opposed to solely supervising individuals who happen to be in the group.
And I may not be understanding it well. So in the traditional, I'm taking that as like with the building a house. You have a person that has to put down the foundation before the framers can come in. Mm-hmm. And then before the roof can go on, the frame has to be up. And so they depend on each other in that way, because if one person doesn't do their job, it affects the entire team's ability to do their job. Whereas with case management, for example, each of those team members has a specific job, and if they don't do their job, it may impact the rest of the team. For example, somebody was talking about somebody being out sick. So that means if you have 5 referrals come in and one person's gone, then the rest of the team may have to take more referrals. Just like with your typist example, if typist B is sick, then typist A may have to pick up some of that workload.
That's correct.
But typist A's job doesn't depend on typist B being there.
That would be,
Understanding this?
well, what you're describing in the latter is more of a characteristic of a co-acting group. What you were describing formally with regard to constructing a house is more typical of a traditional group. Let's draw a distinction between the group that you're working in and, let's say, a treatment team in a residential facility where you've got a social worker, you've got a psychologist, you've got a psychiatrist, you've got a physical therapist, you've got a vocational therapist, you've got a number of techs, you've got an outpatient worker, whatever, or a family involvement coordinator, and all of those members are collectively assigned 10 individuals. Now, you have a team leader, and you might even have some individual accountability because some people need more social work help, some people need an initial psychological assessment, for example, and only some of you can do those kind of things, but ultimately every one of you has to bring your particular professional skills together and do the assessment, come up collectively with a treatment plan, and then each of you contributes what you can to the treatment or the intervention to help for each of those individuals. And in doing so, you're building a comprehensive plan and a comprehensive treatment strategy that you implement, and you're relying upon one another for the assessment and for the implementation of those kind of things. Now, would that strike you as more of a co-acting group or more of a traditional group? Very much a traditional, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So that would be probably why I feel like I supervise a group of individuals
Yes.
as opposed to a team. While there may be there is some informal, but that is constantly changing as people come, as people go, the informal structure. But that's what I try to build on with the team, and I'm not finding that I'm being really successful with it.
Yeah, and it's going to be difficult for you. And there are certain things that are about that informal, let's say, friendship groups, when you get down to it in a co-acting group, that are, for the most part, are off limits to you anyway as a supervisor. It's none of your business many times which person likes another or where their preference in terms of affiliation or affection would rest. Are they doing their job, right? And you're probably not a member of that group. If you're a boss, one of the realities is that while you may be on the outer periphery, even included at some level within that kind of more vibrant, informal, affectively charged life of an informal group, chances are you're not deeply embedded. You're not near the heart of it. Because if you're a boss and you're doing your job as a boss, which means the holding people accountable and being unpleasant at time or having to give people information that they don't like. Honest, appropriate, but it's something that they would prefer not to hear from you. The chances are that's going to alienate you, and the chances are that the members of the group are not going to be trusting you to have all of the information that they have about one another. They're going to want to conceal that to some extent from you as boss. So if you're boss at a formal organization, expect to be excluded from the more intimate kind of center of the informal affective groups that are a part of at least the folks who you supervise. Right?
I've been in the situation too. You even have to be aware of the subgroup dynamics, because if you are trying to supervise a group and then you have individuals who need that individual supervision, those subgroups out of that will watch carefully to see if it is supervision or if it is some kind of special treatment outside of that. Mm-hmm. So you have to look at all of those subgroups inside of that to see the dynamics, or else it causes a huge problem, and you'll be seeing either being too harsh with one, or seeing it as there's some kind of you're pulling them for information about the whole group. They're the spoiler.
Yeah.
So it's knowing the subgroups within those big groups and the connections is important.
See, what Christina's talking to now is the perception that arises within individual groups. Perception that's particularly shaped by the group leadership and is filtered through the group norms. But you can have two different groups that can perceive the same event in very, very different ways. And as a matter of fact, that's the basis for which the Human Relations School of Management actually even arose. Elton Mayo was originally an advocate of scientific management and was doing a study that was basically kind of a human factors kind of study to increase efficiencies when he began to realize that people weren't necessarily behaving the way he expected. Western Electric, Hawthorne plant, they had some reason to believe that an important hygiene factor was illumination. And so the thinking was that if they would brighten up the workplace, it would increase productivity. That was the hypothesis. And sure enough, they increased the lumens and productivity increased. And so they increased the illumination some more and productivity continued to increase. And then at some point, just to prove that they were right, they decided to go ahead and decrease the illumination because they knew that would mean that productivity would decrease. So they cranked it down and productivity increased. Wait a minute, what happened here? You know, and so they cranked it down some more and productivity soared. They had those people working practically in the dark and productivity was going out the roof. They're going, what in heaven's name is going on here? And you probably remember from your research class the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect, that is the knowledge that you're in an experiment itself changes your behavior, right? Same study, you see. They realized, wait a minute, what's going on here? You know, well, people knew that they were part of a study and they were appreciating the attention they were getting. Oh, by the way, that these are mostly women workers in this one particular part of the factory. So they decided, okay, so it's attention that's the difference here. So now we're going to test that new hypothesis out. So we'll go elsewhere in the plant and we'll provide attention to those workers and we'll watch their productivity soar. We're going to be making money hand over fist for this company. So they go to a bunch of men workers and they show them attention and productivity drops, you know. And they go, what the hell is going on here? I'm sorry about that one, you know. So they give him some more attention and productivity keeps going south. You know, and they're thinking, what is going on? And then they begin to realize, oh, wait a minute. It's not just attention, you know. It's perception that's based in groups that's going on here. The women appreciated the attention. The men resent it, right? And it's the way those groups created those perceptions and then enforced those perceptions or reinforced those perceptions within group members and the effect that had on behavior that was key here. Oh my gosh, informal groups exist within organizations. Ta-da, the Human Relations School of Management.
I have a question. So going back to what she was saying before, so we're in two different organizations. So I would view myself as like the co-acting in my group of people. Like we all have the same job, but it doesn't affect. But like I was at a child and family team meeting the other day, and like multiple organizations were present, but we came together.
Yes.
And that would be not within my organization, but it's still a traditional.
Yeah, but you were part of a group at that point in time, a group composed of members of a variety of different organizations, but that's the way that typically works. And because you were bringing individual perspectives, individual strengths, and pooling those kind of things, right, towards some kind of common goal, probably much more like this. Probably much more like
So I
this.
think I experienced that more outside of my organization than actually within it.
I would agree with that.
So what we're saying, because I thought I had it, but then you started talking about all these people doing this evaluation on somebody, and it was like, wow. So what we're saying is, so hers may be co-acting, but as a whole, for the whole Department of Children's Services, it's more traditional because we all depend on each area.
We need to be careful here because I'm talking about a group, and I'm trying to keep that separate from the notion of a department or the formal organization.
Because I felt like we have 3 CPS groups, and if one group isn't doing what they need to do, or the other group is, then we can't function successfully in that.
But now you're talking about between group behaviors as opposed to the members, the relationship of members within a group and the way to characterize a single group. When you're talking about multiple groups within a department, there are a variety of ways that those groups can relate to one another. We'll talk about that later on. But they might compete against one another. They might cooperate with one another. All right? And you'll see that there are, again, a variety of ways to do that. When you're talking about different groups having different functions, and the requirement for groups to cooperate with one another across groups, then you're talking about intergroup behavior. Here we're talking about the relationship of members within a single group as a way of differentiating from a traditional to co-acting, as a way of helping to predict and explain the relative richness of group process over time and group structure here, the anemia, the dearth or lack of same in the co-acting group, and the fact that the manager here has 2 sets of supervisory tools available to him or her. Supervision of individuals or supervision of group. And to be frank about it, the more you can supervise group here as opposed to individuals, probably the more effective you're going to be.
So on my team, I have a traditional group and a co-acting group, because I have such a blend of a team that one of my workers depends highly on my court liaisons. And my assessment workers are kind of like what's in her group. So they're different.
Yeah, you may actually have several different groups within a single team. And again, the notion of nested groups here, so frequent. The formal group is constituted by management. All right? That's the one constituted by management. But informal groups arise naturally over time. It's inevitable. And we can't predict how that's going to happen. Who's going to be a member of what groups, how those boundaries are going to play out, what informal groups are nested within other ones. And so what you may well have, is just as you said, is several different groups, distinct groups, and even one that's essentially co-acting and one that's essentially traditional as informal work groups within a single formal team. Yes?
That's not going to be on the test.
I might put it there just especially for you. Yeah, I would just draw them. Yeah, okay. Right. Now, you're probably familiar with this. Just as individuals go through stages of development, there are a variety of stage models for groups. Much of them come to the same basic kind of understanding. This is the one that I like because it has the alliterative value here. It's easy to remember. Groups form, people come together, the we statement is made, some shared experiences, but still it's largely dominated by individuals in proximity to one another, in interaction with one another, but they don't have common frames of reference yet. They don't have common rules for conducting behavior yet. And so until that happens, there's the storming that's likely, the disagreement, the competition about expectations. Eventually, if the group continues in its development, norming occurs. There's a set of expectations arise over time as to who we are, who are our members, how we'll relate to one another, how we'll see the world. At that point in time, performance will typically improve significantly. even if we're talking about an affective group, a recreational group or whatever, people know how to relate to one another. People know what kind of enjoyment they can have with one another. So you can think of that as performance, entirely appropriate. Or if we're talking about a group at work, now we're talking about higher levels of formal achievement that are possible. And then, quite likely, the group will at some point in time change, it'll adjourn, it'll cease to exist. Now, in the group, variety of roles. We can distinguish between task roles, those things that promote formal achievement of the group maintenance roles. Those are the ones that are important to build the group. They're the ones that are important to maintain the group. And those are the things that are likely to contribute to the group needs satisfaction that group members experience. But then you have the self-oriented roles that are going to occur within the group itself. And those speak to the continuing presence of individuals within the group. Because still, ultimately, a group is composed of individuals. It's something more than that, but we're not going to strip our awareness of the fact that individuals still are in groups, and that individuality is still going to be expressed from time to time in groups. In some groups much more, in some groups much less. I've given you a handout, and I have that handout, I think. Yes. All right. Classification of group roles. Did you see that one on the D2L site? I've got handouts for everybody if you'd like them. We've already killed the tree. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to change the program on the computer, so this single sheet of paper is also stapled. So you'll see that happening several times this afternoon. You've got it if you want it. You want it? Anybody? They're going free. Believe me, the price is low on this thing, particularly for the stapled ones. There we go. You got one? You want one with a staple? Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I got them. There you go. There you go. There's the staple right there. There's the staple. Feel like an idiot when it came out like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You got one? Killed the tree already, you know what I mean? All right. You're welcome. Here I go. And you'll notice from the handout here a variety of roles here that, again, speak to the task-oriented kind of activities here. Initiator, information seeker, opinion giver, evaluation giver. You can certainly read along. The maintenance roles, encourager, harmonizer, gatekeeper, follower, etc. And then those individual roles. Okay. Notice that as we're talking about building the group, for the most part, the individual roles are run counter to that. If behavior can't somehow contribute to the group maintenance especially, it's perhaps at best irrelevant to the group, and at worst will erode some of the cohesion or intensity of the group. Okay, here. While we're talking about those things, do you have the handout on activities which encourage group loyalty and motivation? Do you have one that has a staple in it? Would you like that? Yeah, cool. Okay, here you go. He actually has yours, so I'm giving you one instead.
You can have mine.
Here you go. Here you go. Want some more? Want some more? Who else wants some more? Okay, cool. All right. Here you go. Here you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There you go. You're welcome. Uh-huh. You got this one? Yeah. You came prepared today, didn't you? Cool.
Thanks.
You're welcome. There you go. There you go. Plenty. Just because I care. You're welcome. All right. One of the things about leadership that I don't know if I said last week, but it's so important, and these two handouts, the second one especially, speak to this. You know, good leadership and good followership go hand in hand. And particularly in a group context, the ability of people to exercise good followership is very, very important in building norms of typically of respect for members of the group, of a sense of safety within the group. And that doesn't mean that you give up the ability to disagree within a group, but the way you express disagreement or the way you express some kind of countervailing position, if done with respect, if done using and based upon the skills of active listening, can be very, very important in contributing to good leadership and the development of a healthy group culture as well. So as you're looking at these things that help to influence group loyalty and motivation, as you're looking at the specific examples or roles that are associated with group maintenance, locate the followership in addition to leadership. And I think it would be very, very difficult to find in the history of humankind leaders who didn't at some point in time have to exercise some period of time as followers themselves. Most leaders are themselves followers of others as well. Those two are intimately related with one another. And then we have the characteristics of highly effective work groups. Do you have that one? This is the one that actually did need to be stapled together, and we have it. There you go. That's one thing about the D2L site. You never know who's going to have things. Do you have them? Have them? Everybody need one?
I have a printer at home, but I don't have any ink.
Been there. Got it? You don't need it? Cool. Okay, good deal. Thanks. There you go. You're welcome. There you go. Randolph of Blackburn presents an interesting typology of groups, which I've identified here. Floundering, interpersonal, the task-oriented, and the team. The floundering group is one where there are few maintenance and task roles performed. It's a group of low intensity to its members. They could care less probably if they're a member of the group or how the group exists. Little is expected of the group with regard to task performance. The interpersonal, we're all very, very familiar with that. We've all been a part of countless numbers of interpersonal groups. Lots of maintenance roles performed, few formal task roles performed. In contrast to the task-oriented, which is just the opposite. And then under this particular typology, and again, language can sometimes confuse and sometimes clarify, but here these folks are using the term team to refer to that group where there are many maintenance tasks performed, but there are also a variety of tasks, formal tasks expected of the group. It's quite possible that a formal group that's been composed particularly to be task-oriented or team can be found wanting in terms of its formal achievement and might actually be characterized as more accurately as a floundering group, or perhaps has transposed itself into an interpersonal one where the maintenance needs of the group or the individual maintenance needs, emotional needs of members dominate as opposed to the achieving the formal task of the group. What are some of the norm-related types of individuals and groups? Well, we've got the leader, and again, we've distinguished between the task leader and the affective leader of a group. It does happen on occasion that the same individual has a set of skills that can adequately direct the group to its formal achievement, at the same time attend to the emotional needs of group and group members. The regular member of the group, more typically thought of as a follower, but again, that's a variable in terms of the ways people perform that particular role. The deviant is somebody who buys in to a number of the group boundary and norms, but at the same time continues to exercise a considerable amount of independence. Whereas the isolate is one who seeks to escape from the expectations and from the effect of the group norms and group leadership. How do those norms originate? Well, sometimes it's through explicit statements on the part of group members. Let's do this. I think we should be more respectful of one another. Don't shout. Let's don't shout. Those kind of statements. A critical event in a group's history can also profoundly shape the norms of a group. Primacy and precedent are very important here. That is, something happens early in the life of a group, members of the group assume or conclude that it worked well, that a response worked well once, it will work well again, it becomes the norm. And of course, members of a group come to a group with earlier experiences. They may be coming from experiences that are similar to tasks or to group processes that they're experiencing in a new group. And so that can also contribute to a carryover effect in terms of norms. Now, norms vary along a variety of dimensions. These are simply some of them. Importance. And this is not just important to the group, but it's important to individual members of the group. So we can talk about a norm being important to the group's formal achievement or the group processes, but we can also talk about norms in their relative importance to individual members of the group. The intensity, the importance, well, I don't want to confound those. Intensity is the emotional meaning of group membership and of the events of the group to members of the group. Crystallization refers to the specificity of group norms. How unambiguous, how detailed. And then there's acceptance. There will be differential acceptance of any group norm on the part of group members. Not everybody will experience a group in the same way, just like families. How many of you have siblings? How many of you have brothers or sisters? Just about everybody. You realize that your family is different than your sibling's family, right? if for no other reason they have you as a brother or sister and you don't. Right? But birth order is different for people. Gender is different across siblings many times, and the way parents relate and the way they socialize boys as opposed to girls vary. So, same kind of thing here. Now, cohesiveness, the extent to which various group members agree on things, can be affected by a variety of things, including time spent together, the severity of the initiation. So if you've been through a fraternity or sorority in high school or college, if you've been in an elite military or paramilitary elite unit, if you've been a member of Vanessa's gang, you're likely to experience some pretty severe initiations. Group size, again, that's pretty intuitive. In general, the smaller the group, the more likely there'll be some cohesiveness. External threats. That gets back to that earlier conversation about what keeps many delinquent groups or juvenile youth groups together. It's the threats that exist in the environment, not the importance of the emotional ties within the group. Previous history and heterogeneity here. In general, heterogeneity works against cohesiveness. But again, heterogeneity generally works in favor of equipping the group with a variety of perspectives, knowledge, and skills so that it can remain flexible and appreciate the nuances of situations. When we're talking about social intensity, all right, pressures toward conformity and uniformity. The more intense the membership of a group, right, remember that quadrant that we had, particularly where things are radiating out from the group structure over here? The more intense the group, the more pressures for conformity and uniformity. Individuation being discouraged. On the other hand, greater caring about interpersonal rewards and sanctions. That is to say, greater caring about how other members of the group perceive the self, whether they like or dislike the self. Now that can become particularly important if the group norms are either in favor of or aligned with organizational culture, organizational goals and values, or run counter to those kind of things. Said differently, a high level of intensity of the group is not necessarily a good thing for the organization. If the group fosters or is aligned with organizational values and organizational goals, higher level of social intensity of the group will probably be conducive to promote organizational goal achievement. On the other hand, if the group's norms and the leadership's values are discourage or run counter to organizational values and organizational group, goals, a high level of intensity of the group will undermine the effectiveness of an organization achieving its goals, all other things remaining equal. Think about unionization and collective bargaining. Right. Will unions typically enter a work environment where there is a very positive, trusting, mutual respect between management and labor? No. That's the very worst environment to try to engage in collective bargaining and unionization. So if you're trying to bring a union in, one of the things you're going to be interested in doing is crystallizing and aggravating latent tensions that exist within the organization. And until one achieves a new workable balance, it's quite possible that the beginning stages of unionization or collective bargaining there will be those that actually run counter toward organizational goal achievement, because frankly, organizational goals are largely defined by management. And synergism when work outcomes, that really means that groups, task groups with high social intensity have available to them that kind of extra added punch. The 1 + 1 = 3, partly because of the trust, partly because of the commitment to the organization or to the group that exists there. Okay, what are some of the things that affect group behavior? Individual inputs, the personalities of the individuals. We're not going to get away from the fact that individuals still exist within groups. Individuals still exist within organizations. There are a variety of situational inputs as well. Group size. Some of the literature suggests 5 to 12, for example, as a kind of an optimal size for a task group. The composition of the group, how heterogeneous it is, how homogeneous it is. The tasks and technologies available to the group, whether they're simple or complicated. Things like physical layout. Are you actually at the same place? Are you trying to engage in this group process via the internet and Skype? And of course, the impact of culture and organizational norms. What kind of decisions might a group engage in, and what might be some of the nature of decision making in a group? Here are the variety of ways that this can happen. Decision by default, which is basically just kind of accepting the status quo, accepting what is for the most part. Decision by the group leader or authority rule. Decision by a few or minority rule. A majority rule, which is a plurality basically. A vote, all in favor, all opposed, the ayes have it. Consensus, that is everybody agreeing, though some with reservations. And then the unanimous decision without reservation. We're all in this together. Now, the unfortunate thing about the unanimous and we're all in this together is that can actually be an expression of groupthink. Have you heard of groupthink before? Yeah, and it's basically, excuse me? Yeah, that's pretty much what it amounts to, and it's in favor of the maintenance needs of the group. The maintenance needs of the group are perceived as demanding a uniformity of think, a uniformity of decisions, a uniformity of values. This is where individuality really does get pushed out, and the group begins to accept its own very limiting and limited premises for decision making. In an organization, it's generally a good thing, I think, to be alert to groupthink, to take times in critical decision making to just pause and to invite criticism, to invite some kind of brainstorming as a way of correcting for or becoming aware of a groupthink phenomenon. Frankly, I think it's more common than we might otherwise imagine. And it very much leads to, think of blinders on a horse. It really, really leads to a very restricted kind of decision making. Yes?
On a board that I'm on, we had a way of dealing with groupthink when it came to, we had to redo a whole event from scratch. And we had to take it to the board of directors, and we took a survey to them blind. They couldn't talk at all before or after they did it. And then we had a discussion for about 5 minutes, and then it ended, and then we brought the results back to them. So we kind of eliminated groupthink by blindsiding them with a survey that they didn't know was coming.
I kind of like that idea.
So, but it eliminated groupthink, but after we changed the event against their opinions, they liked it better. So it was kind of one of those, you don't expect it to be, but it actually worked out really well.
Here, I want to just identify some things having to do with individual and group dynamics, because we don't want to lose sight of the fact that individuals exist. What are some of the contributions? What are some of the issues involved in the way individuals relate to group and organizations? Well, one of them is that it's through groups that many individuals learn about organizations, especially in the richness and detail that are necessary for them. Groups can help individuals learn about the self, themselves, in comparison to others. Nothing like being a newbie at a job and watching people who are accomplished do it more quickly, do it with less effort, to realize the learning curve that you have in front of you. Groups help people learn new skills, either formally or informally. They can help individuals obtain rewards not otherwise available to them. Think of the opportunities for leadership, for affiliation, for recognition that come from groups. They don't come from the formal organization as a planned experience. They come from the groups that arise within the organization spontaneously and then offer these kind of experiences to members. Groups can help individuals obtain direct satisfaction for their needs and wants. That's particularly the case of traditional work groups, where the contribution of the group itself helps one achieve what's necessary in order to earn the paycheck or whatever. I think in general, it's through groups that we find ourselves cementing ourselves to organizations, feeling a sense that we belong, that the organization is the right place for us at that time in our lives. Think about a job you've had, or think about the internship that you're in now. How long did it take you to begin to feel comfortable in the organization? How long did it take you, and what was happening in order for you to feel like you were a part of the organization, that you weren't just an outsider there? Didn't most of it have to do with your recognition and acceptance by informal groups within the organization? It's very, very important, I think. Now, having said all that, let's also remember that the importance of groups, the role that groups play in organizations, also impose upon the individual additional tasks with regard to socialization or knowledge about those kind of groups and what's expected of you, those norms. And they impose upon the individual performance obligations that are norm-specific and group-specific. Okay, so if you feel a part of an organization largely because you feel a part and are accepted by and recognized by informal groups there, do any of you ever notice a kind of a disjointedness? On the one hand, when you're at work, and on the other hand, let's say when you're partying with your buds, or you're at a social club, you're all dressed up when you're at work, you're quite professional, and at the club, you're not. You're the same person, but there are nested identities in each of us, isn't there? Okay, so at work, you're a member of a management team, but you're also a part of a work group responsible to a boss. And as a manager, you also supervise a group, and sometimes they ask you to come out and recreate with them. Let's go over to the restaurant and have a beer, or we'll have some chips or something like that tonight. Celebrate on a Friday night, but you're the boss. Don't you feel different depending upon the groups you're with? Because you have different groups, different standing within those groups, and there are different norms across those different groups. So again, calls upon that nested identity. And make sure you use the right nested identity with regard to which group you're in. Now, we come back to the group dynamics that we were talking about earlier. The variety of ways that groups can relate to one another and how they can manage the potential for intergroup conflict. Notice it's the potential for intergroup conflict. Variety of strategies are available. One is avoidance. Let's just have the groups avoid one another as best as possible. And if they aren't relying upon the same resources, if their task accomplishment doesn't require cooperation or interaction with one another, then avoidance is a legitimate and easily available strategy. And it reduces conflict. An alternative is competition. And the competition, particularly if there's some level of resources that are shared, if there's a single reward structure that encourages competition, that's quite likely. Accommodation is a very passive effort at submitting to the minimal expectation of the other group. Compromise involves a more assertive interaction. Each group giving up something of its independence, something of its values, something of its goals in favor of what it receives from the other through that compromise. And collaboration is an active strategy of working with one another. But again, we're talking about the behavior of group relating to other groups here. Notice that intergroup coalitions are more likely when the task interdependence is high and when the resource interdependence is high. So Cicely, one of the things that you might have been talking about with the interorganizational groups that you're a part of is a case where the interdependence of the task environment is high. In order to achieve that, and no one organization has sufficient command of the variety of resources necessary in order to achieve the task. So each can achieve what it wants to without giving up important values, but only through the cooperation of other organizations that are similarly situated. That is in a general way. Lack of competition, the ability to coexist, and yet the need to work with one another in order for any to achieve its goals. Very, very likely. What are some various suggestions for management? Okay, attend to the difference between group and individual supervision. Use both when you can. Use the one most appropriate in all such circumstances. Attend to group membership variables and match the group to task or task to group. That is to say that if you're going to constitute a group, try and put it together with a size and a composition that has the knowledge and skills and resources necessary for successful task completion. Help the group achieve a moderately high level of social intensity. Help the group achieve balance between the social influence of the group, particularly of its leadership, and norm enforcement. That is to say, try and help the group leaders reinforce norms in the group that are consistent with goal achievement, organizational goal achievement. Help group leaders create and then reinforce group norms that are consistent with organizational goals. And then create an overall environment that supports productive work behavior for individuals and groups. End of that one. Sure.
So, Dr. Smith,
Yeah.
You want a moderately high intensity level, but not an extremely high intensity level.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because the problem with the one that's exceptionally high is that the affiliation with the group becomes more important than a variety of other things that are frankly important to the organization and important to you as manager. Right? Can also begin to crowd out, if you will, or put pressure upon the healthy and healthful expression of individuality within a work environment. We don't want to give the organization over to the groups, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that groups exist within organizations, that the way they function, their composition, the nature of those groups can either contribute to or diminish the ability of the organization to meet its goals. Okay. And so in a management role, what you're going to try and do is to foster those parts of the group reality that promote organizational goal achievement. And especially from a social work perspective, that are also healthful for the emotional life of members of the group, of the individual, so that we can create a healthful and healthy work environment. You know the difference between healthful and healthy? Right. If you are fit and you are without disease or illness, you are healthy. The behaviors that got you that way were healthful, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that I believe that the role of management includes a responsibility to create healthy and healthful work environments. Healthy work environments with those that would be conducive to goal achievement for the organization. Healthful work environments would be those that promote higher level of functioning for individuals.